It's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Raghavendra Gadagkar, whom I've known now since 1992. And we've been trying to get him to campus for some time to talk to the students. So I'm very glad we can. He's very well known as a wonderful speaker, especially in talking about science, but making it very accessible and interesting and converting the science that he does to different disciplines of inquiry. So Professor Gadagkar is a National Science Chair at the Indian Institute of Science, where for many years he was the chair of the Center for Ecological Sciences and also founded the Center for Contemporary Studies, a center that encourages conversations between the social science, humanities, and the natural sciences. He has won many, many awards for his research, but he's most well known for his work on Rhopalidia marginata, a eusocial wasp. And a lot of what he's been doing is looking at the foundations of what constitutes eusociality in this wasp. And he's written a number of books on doing this as well as doing simple, low-cost backyard science. And I'm sure all of this will come through in the talk. So without further ado, I don't want to get in the way, but I'll hand it over to Professor.
Thank you, Harini. Harini was one of my best students. I am delighted to be here. Wonderful. Thank you, Harini, for inviting me and for the kind introduction. As much as possible, please come in the front, and I'll tell you why. I want to make this a very interactive thing. I could not decide what to speak on because I can speak for a few days, and I don't think you will appreciate that. So what I will do is I will start off somewhere, and then I want you to ask questions and take me wherever you want to take me. I don't need to go to the end. I made a huge presentation, so we don't need to go to the end. But I want you to ask questions and take me wherever you want, and I'm willing to go wherever you come. So in order to do that, it will be helpful if more and more people came in the front so that I can hear you. Does that make sense? Okay, so last time I gave this talk and I told people that it's very interactive, ask questions. They stopped me on the first slide and asked me 10 questions. So here's a challenge for you. So I've called this the fascinating world of insect societies. As general a title as you can. So basically we can speak of anything, and as I said, I will request you to take me wherever you want. I understood from Harini that there will be many undergraduate students here studying physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, that kind of thing. So I've tailored it a little bit to that, but of course you can take me in some other direction. Okay, so I think everybody is familiar with the honeybee, and probably many of you have seen honeybees and some of you have been stung by honeybees, right? So honeybee is the sort of quintessential insect society. Many species of insects live in groups. We usually call them a colony. And this colony actually constitutes a society. And we have good reason to use the word society because they resemble human societies. Human society is, of course, our reference point in many ways. And I will show you that they are superior to us in many ways. In honeybee, for example, as I said, a quintessential insect society. In a honeybee colony, there would be between 10 to 50, 60,000 bees living in this small space, and they make a nest for themselves. And the nest is made from wax. They drink nectar from flowers, convert the sugars there into fat, make it into wax, and secrete the wax out of the body through a small opening in their abdomen. Then through their mouth parts and legs, they will pick up that little wax that is coming out of this and fashion it into a beautiful nest with perfectly hexagonal cells. And this is actually a nest covered with bees. Now, if you look at the cells of the nest are used for storing food. The food consists of nectar, which they gather from flowers and make it into what we call honey, and pollen, which they get from flowers and also store it in the cells. But the cells are also used for rearing the young ones. So eggs are laid inside the cells and they become larvae, then the larvae are fed and then they become adults, and then from the pupa, the adult bee will come out. So all this is used, the cells are used for all these purposes. If you look at the adult bees, there are three kinds of bees in any colony. There is one and only one large female fertile mated individual. We call her the queen. She is the only one who can lay eggs. Workers cannot mate because in the process of evolution, they have lost their genitalia and therefore they cannot mate, but they have not lost their ovaries entirely. Their ovaries are about 1% of the queen's ovaries. So they can lay a small number of eggs, but they do so only in the absence of the queen. Because the queen produces chemical substances which prevents them from developing even those small ovaries and laying any eggs. Which means the queen has the monopoly over reproduction. The rest of the bees are smaller in size. They are almost sterile, and we call them the worker bees because they do all the work that is required to run the society. That would mean cleaning, nursing, building, guarding, and going out and bringing food. All of these are done by the worker bees, so we call them workers. There are, in addition, a small number of fat, lazy bees who are the males. The males do not work. They do not participate in social life. Males stay on the nest of birth for some days, during which time they are begging food from their sisters. And then when they mature, they fly off from the nest and mate with virgin queens from other colonies and die in the act of mating. So on the nest, you will not see any functional males and you will rarely see any males. And that is why in 1600 something, these societies were given a name, and the name is they are feminine monarchies. That's what they are. Now, what you'll see on the next slide, or just a word about this particular picture, there are 4 basic kinds of honeybees in the world. If you ask a taxonomy, they'll say there are, but basically 4 kinds of bees. 3 of them are more sophisticated in their social lives. One of them is somewhat primitive in its social life. Of the 4, 3 are present in Asia and India. So there is a so-called European bee, which has been introduced by humans into North America, Australia, but it is basically a European bee. But the other 3 are Asian bees. And of that, one of them I said is less sophisticated, and that is this one. And this is a very small bee. We call it the Asian dwarf bee. And that's this picture. This picture is also taken from the campus of Indian Institute of Science. What you see here is a picture close up. What you see in the middle is this large queen surrounded by a group of workers. If you move the workers a bit and look for the queen, you will typically find that the queen is surrounded by a small group of workers, maybe 10 to 12 workers. These workers are, if you like, on royal duty. Their job currently is to take care of the queen. And take care means they lick the queen, they clean the queen, and they feed the queen. And they do not allow her to go anywhere away from this ring. So in some sense, she is the prisoner of these workers. And why do they have to do this? Because the queen is too busy. She lays thousands of eggs per day. She drinks nectar, converts that sugar into fat, into eggs, and she lays eggs. The workers are taking care of her. The interesting thing is that if you watch this for some time, you will find that these workers are doing this very diligently, but after some 10 minutes or so, they seem to lose interest and they go off and do something else. And some other bees which are doing something else will come and become part of what we call the royal retinue of bees. So this is the royal retinue. Now, we don't know why they do this, but the consequence of this is that the queen does 2 things. She lays eggs and she produces chemicals, which are required to be spread around the colony. So the consequence of this working in shifts by the royal retinue is that a large fraction of the colony has the chance to be in the close vicinity of the queen. And then when they go off to do something else, they rub off those chemicals on others. So the chemicals produced by the queen spread very rapidly and very efficiently because these workers keep moving between the queen and something else, between the queen and something else. And these chemicals are important for the well-functioning of the colony. This does not mean that the queen is the boss. This does not mean she decides what to do. So we'll get into the details later on. These insect societies work not by top-down control, but by bottom. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. Okay. So in case of honeybees, typically worker bees live for 4 to 6 weeks. For the first half of their life, they work at home. In fact, they work in a very orderly manner. What the bee will do today depends on its age. So the youngest bee will begin by cleaning the cell from which she came out, clean the surrounding cells, and 1 or 2 days later, the glands that produce wax will mature. They are not mature at birth, at eclosion. When the wax glands mature, they become builder bees. They will build new cells, they will repair old cells. A few days later, other glands in their mouth parts will develop, and these produce various chemicals which are required to be added to the larval food. So the larval food consists of honey, which they have made. Basically, they bring nectar, they store it in these cells, they evaporate the water content in it, because nectar usually is only about 10 to 20% sugar. They make it 60-80% by evaporating, and they do that by fanning their wings. But they also add some chemicals to that to preserve it. That is what we call honey. They will mix honey with pollen, which also has been brought and stored, and to that they will add some chemicals. That is what we call bee bread, and that is what is given to the larvae. Every larva is fed several times a day, and there may be 10, 20,000 hungry larvae in the nest, and as far as we know, they don't forget to feed anyone. In the second half of their life, they venture out of the nest to collect food, and the food consists of pollen and nectar. Occasionally, they will collect some plant resins in order to seal damaged parts of the nest, also in order to keep ants away. But that's a minor thing. The main thing they look for is nectar and pollen grains. So here is a bee which is on its flight, and it collects nectar and pollen. So they visit individual flowers and drink whatever little bit of nectar it has and store it in something called a crop. In the crop, it is not digested, because they then go and deliver it to bees who are waiting at home to be used to make honey. But pollen is collected in a very different way. Honeybees do not actively gather pollen in flowers. As they move from flower to flower, because of the lots of hairs on the body of the bees, the pollen rubs off on their body. In fact, you can see a fair amount of pollen rubbed off here. And then they will brush all of this pollen into what we call pollen baskets. So each hind leg has what we call a pollen basket. So they'll pack it there, they'll come home and deliver these 2 packets of pollen, which is kept at home. One of the remarkable things about honeybees is it seems to be the only animal species other than Homo sapiens which has a language, a symbolic system of communication, and in this case we call it the dance language. So when honeybees find a large tree in bloom with lots of flowers and lots of food, they will not attempt to bring it all back home themselves. They will take a little bit of it, they will come home and they will inform the bees at home that they have found something and recruit these bees to do the transportation. And this recruiting is done by the so-called dance language. And there are 2 kinds of dances. One is a simple round dance. So the forager or so-called scout bee, which has found something, will come home and dance round and round. The meaning of that simply is, there is food nearby, go and get it. What to look for? Smell me, I am thinking of it. Smell me, you know what to look for, it's nearby, go and find it. I won't tell you anything more. But bees may collect food from up to 10 kilometers away. Then it's not useful to say there is food, go and find it. Then they will actually perform a different kind of dance, a waggle dance, which will include information not only about what to get from the smell, but how far to go, in what direction to go, and how much is there, how many of you should go. All of this information is conveyed through the waggle dance. And the waggle dance is a very, very sophisticated product of evolution. I won't go into the details, just a little teaser. What the bees seem to be able to do is, if this is the sun, and you drop a perpendicular from the sun, this is on the horizon, this is called the azimuth of the sun. So now you have a point on the horizon. Now you can draw a line from this azimuth to the hive and to the food source. Okay, let's say this is the food source. So now you can see this is 80 degrees to the left of the sun. This angle they seem to be able to measure, remember this angle, come home and use this angle to perform their dance. Now it's much more complicated for them because they do not dance on a horizontal surface. This angle is measured on the horizontal surface. Sun's azimuth, my height here, the foot here. But now they dance on a vertical surface in a dark cavity. So they have to translate this horizontal angle into a vertical angle. And their symbolic communication is up means sun, down means away from the sun. So when they're dancing at home, if this is the foot they have gone to, this is how they will dance. So they will dance towards 80 degrees, come back. So the waggle dance consists of a waggle here and a straight run. So they will shaking their abdomen, they run here, come back. This is up. So the bees who are watching this dance will know that I should go up to the hive and I should fly 80 degrees to the left of the sun's azimuth, and so on. So I won't go into the details. I just want to show you how impressive and sophisticated this is. And this is one of the reasons why honeybees are very interesting. Other social insects do not have such a dance. Honeybees are exceptional. I don't know whether any of you have been stung by a bee, but stinging somebody means instant suicide for a honeybee. Because when the bee inserts its sting into your body or into the body of any other victim, it is not able to withdraw it. Because the sting has barbs facing outside. So when it tries to withdraw, its abdomen ruptures and the sting, the poison gland which is attached to the sting, and a part of the intestines are left hanging on the victim. And the bee tries to, and the bee flies away only to die within a few minutes. However, this poison gland, which is now attached to the victim and not to the bee, continues to pump venom into the victim. And because of some volunteers who agreed to get stung for an experiment, people have measured that this can go on for 60 seconds after the bee has gone away. Now you can imagine that this makes the whole system an extremely efficient venom delivery mechanism. But it comes at the cost of the bee. The bee dies. To start with, worker bees do not reproduce. They spend their whole lives working for the queen or the colony. So we call this an act of altruism. But killing themselves to protect the hive is an even more dramatic example of altruism. And this altruism is paradoxical. If you think in very simple terms about Darwinian theory of natural selection, it says survival of the fittest. So anybody who does this should have been eliminated by natural selection long ago. But natural selection has not succeeded in eliminating this for millions of years. So there is an evolutionary paradox in the altruism that is shown very frequently by different insect societies. And that's one of the reasons why we are very much interested, especially evolutionary biologists are very interested in studying insect societies. And this is simply a picture of how this happens. No questions so far? Yes? Yes, please.
Have you any throughout the company?
In honeybees, no, because workers cannot replace the queens. So there's no point in doing that. You're basically harming yourself. However, in other species where workers can replace their queens, this is a very frequent occurrence. But in science, everything there's a caveat. Now there's a caveat to this answer. There is one particular race of honeybees in the southernmost tip of Africa where the workers have found a way to replace their queens. And there they do this. So when it is possible, when it is useful, they get it. Yes, please. The queens can sting, but their sting does not break off from the body. So they don't have those barbs. The queens use this to fight with each other. When a new colony is to be made, several queens are produced. They will fight with each other until one survives. And there's no point in surviving if your sting has been lost. So the queens can sting, their stings do not break off, but they use it to fight with each other. Yes. Yeah, you go ahead. Yes, so obviously, when the colony grows large, they have to make a new colony. Now, there's no point, right? Now, to make a new colony, you need a new queen. To start with, in any colony, there can be only one queen. But to make a new colony, you need a new queen. So that's when they make new queens. And that's again a complicated process because normally the queen suppresses making of new queens. But then she either because she becomes old and weak, or because she wants to actively make a new colony, she will temporarily remove that suppression. Then new queens are produced. And again, I can tell you one extremely interesting thing. When a new queen is produced, I'm simplifying a lot of things, of course. Only one can stay. Somebody has to leave. Invariably, always, the mother leaves. And the daughter inherits the old nest. The mother leaves with a few faithful group of workers to undertake the risky job of building a new home. And the daughter stays back and inherits the nest, the wax, the honey, the pollen, and most of the worker force. Invariably, is what. But only in honeybees. In other species, the opposite happens. Okay? Yes? None of them, because workers can never become queens. New queens are produced by new eggs. The decision of whether an individual will grow up to become a worker or a queen is made in the early larval stage by the kind of food they are given. So some chosen larvae are given a very special sugar-rich diet, and that will put them on a developmental pathway to grow into queens. The rest of the workers get ordinary food, and they will go into a developmental pathway to become workers. So adult workers cannot transform themselves into queens. In fact, if the queen dies accidentally, the colony has no option but to die, except they do something we call emergency queen rearing. The queen is dead. They'll go around looking, is there any egg? Is there any small larva? Then I can feed it royal jelly and make a new queen, then we can continue. If not, everybody dies. Yes? Is that the queen? Yeah. It's very interestingly complicated. Nobody decides anything. That's the beauty of it. First of all, queen is large. So she needs a large cell. Right? So what the queen inhibits is the making of large cells. If you make large cells, then you might produce a queen. So I inhibit making of large cells. But if the queen is weak, then that inhibition is gone and large cells are made. The queen will lay eggs in every cell, but the workers follow a rule that if a larva is sitting in a large cell, she should be given royal jelly, special food. Then it becomes. So it's very difficult to say who decides. That's why there's a chain of command and it can be very complicated. Yes. Only animal species other than humans, not just social insects. Yes. So there are lots of examples of communication, but language is something more than communication. So the standard definition of language is it's a set of symbolic arbitrary signals. So it has symbolic and arbitrary, and it conveys a specific meaning. No other species seems to have come to that stage. Okay, I will move on because there are more. Honeybee is just one species. There are many more interesting. I'm satisfied that you guys can stop me and take me in different directions, but I want you to take me from another bus stop to go in a different direction. Okay, so honeybees are not the only social insects. So I want to introduce you to the equally fascinating world of ants. While there are maybe 12 species of honeybees, there are at least 15,000 known species of ants, and probably another 15,000 unknown to science. Like the honeybees, the ants are social, there's a queen, there are lazy drones, everything is very similar. Except that unlike the honeybees, the workers do not do their work according to their age. They do their work according to their body size and shape, which means different workers have different body size and shape, which is not true in honeybees. All of these ants belong to the same species, indeed to the same colony. And as you can imagine, this ant is very good at being a soldier, at being a guard bee, because thick mandibles. But it is hopeless at picking up small seeds and bringing back to the nest. This ant is very good at that. It can pick up small seeds and bring back to the nest. But when there's a line of these ants, there are a few of these guarding them on either side. So division of labor is based on the body size and shape. That is the specialty of ants, which you don't see in honeybees. And this sometimes leads to so much variation in the body size and shape that people often confuse different ants belonging to the same species as different species if you don't see them inside the same nest. And it turns out that because of this, ants hold the world record for the maximum difference in body size within a species and within a sex. There are lots of examples where males and females are very different. But within females, within the species, they hold the world record for what we call morphological dimorphism. And that world record is held by an Asian ant. And here, my friend Mark Moffat has taken the largest member of the colony, placed the smallest member of the colony on its head, and taken a scanning electron micrograph. I gave this talk last week somewhere in Bangalore, and one student in the audience said, "Sir, I have found this ant in Bangalore also." That's quite possible. This was collected in Malaysia, but people tell me it's also present here. This ant weighs 500 times this ant. And if there are any developmental biologists here, you would be interested to know that both of these can be produced from the same genome. The same egg can give rise either to this, depending on the food. Then, this is a very common ant. You'll find it every year. We call this the weaver ant. We call the weaver ant because it makes nests by stitching together leaves. And you'll find them all over here. There are two species in the world. There's one in Africa, one in Asia. The one here is called Ecophylla smaragdina. And it's a very nice name, Ecophylla. It makes its nest from leaves. And what these ants do is, this is one leaf, this is another leaf, and you can see the number of ants that are required to bend these two leaves and align themselves. So they make these long bridges, and after some time, the ants in the middle of the bridge will drop off. So the bridge becomes narrower and narrower until it is aligned. Once it is aligned, they stitch these leaves together. And they stitch it using nothing less than silk fibers. Where do they get the silk? Adult insects cannot make silk, but the larvae can make silk. So once the leaves are aligned, one of the ants will go inside the nest, pick up a full-grown larva, bring it outside, squeeze it appropriately, and persuade it to donate some silk for the community good. That's what it's doing here. And they actually stitch these leaves together. I want you to ponder what kind of communication, coordination, cooperation is required to achieve this. And the brains of ants are tiny. They are smaller than a pinhead. That is why now we know that ants and bees and wasps, they do not use conventional individual intelligence. They use collective intelligence. And I'll talk a little bit about collective intelligence. So this is what they're doing. Now then of course there are termites, which again all of you are familiar with. Now termites are also sophisticated insect societies. In each case I'll point out one difference. I pointed out one difference between ants and bees. Now I'll point out one difference between termites and the rest. Termites are not feminine monarchies. They have kings, thank God. They have male workers. In fact, this is an artist's conception of what the underground colony of a termite would look like. Here is the queen. You can see she's suitably impressive. This is her swollen abdomen, gaster, which is full of eggs. But next to her, there's a king. He's not very impressive, but he is the king. He actually lives with her and regularly mates with her, provides for her, and they run a happy family with males and females. But there is something else that is very interesting about termites. Most termite workers are juveniles. They are the young ones. In fact, many of these young termites, they spend their whole life working and have no time to grow up. So you can think of this as the ultimate in child labor. They never even grow up. That brings me to my favorite insect societies, and these are the wasps. There are many thousands of species of wasps in the world. Not all of them are social. Only a few are social. Few means few thousand. And almost all social wasps can be called paper wasps. And the reason is that they build their nest not from wax as honeybees do, not from leaves as ants do, not from soil as termites do, but from paper. How do they get paper? They manufacture paper. How do they manufacture paper? Exactly as we manufacture paper. They scrape cellulose fibers from plants, add various chemicals, chew it into a fine pulp, spread it on a thin layer, fan their wings and dry it, and it is paper. You can actually write on it. Here is a large nest covered with a paper envelope. This is paper, you can write on this. But in this case, they cover the whole thing, leaving only a small opening for the foragers to go in and out. Now, don't try this at home. But if you do, you will find that when you open the nest, you find what I call a multi-storied apartment complex. All of this is floor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of this is made from paper. And if you turn it around, you will find these are all pupae of the wasps. Another important difference. Wasps are completely non-vegetarian. They're completely carnivorous. They eat other insects, spiders. And they have not invented a refrigerator. So they cannot store food unlike honeybees, unlike ants. And so they have to get their daily supply of food every day for the thousands of hungry larvae. But these wasps are very aggressive, very difficult to study. And so I study another wasp which I'll come to later. So now let me step back a little bit and show this slide, and then again I'll ask for questions. Why do we study insect societies? Good question to ask. Anybody is studying anything, you can ask why. The answer may be anything, but the question should be asked. You can say, because I am bored of doing anything else in the world. Still a valid answer. But doesn't mean you shouldn't ask the question. Because the answer may be very different, may be very unique, maybe you don't know what it is. So never shy away from asking questions. No question is stupid. Answers, plenty of them are stupid, but questions is not a problem. So why do we study insect societies? It turns out that there are myriad applications in the fields of pharmacology, physiology and medicine, telecommunication and division of labor, decentralized work organization, robotics and AI. All of these benefits, these fields have enormously benefited from the study of insect societies. In fact, many things are learned from insect societies to advance these subjects. But I am much more interested in curiosity. How can we possibly turn away from little insects fighting for a territory, sacrificing themselves to save each other's lives, practicing agriculture, caring for the injured, building structures with exquisite architecture? There's an endless list of curiosities. Most applied research is born from curiosity-driven starting points. So never ask, is this a waste of time? Finding out something is never a waste of time. If you can do it with less money, better. But asking any question is interesting. So let me now give you one or two examples. Well, I'm sure at this stage we can... No, the wasps don't. Even the bees, only the honeybees do. There are very few species which do that. Again, we don't know why. When something is there, we can say why it is there. But when it's not there, we can't say why it is not. We really don't know. Yes, please. Yeah, anybody? Yes.
Why? They don't
Yes.
die.
They work for their entire lifespan. They never have it. See, like, you know the life cycle of a butterfly, right? So there's an egg, then there's a larva, and the larva molds into different stages. We call them instars, and then the final mold gives them an adult. So they don't have time to get there at all. They spend all their life in the juvenile state. Curious, isn't it? Yes, it is. Yes.
How do you get
That's the beauty of ants, bees, and wasps. In ants, bees, and wasps, unlike the rest of us, other animals, unlike humans, the mother has complete control over the choice of the sex of her offspring. she can produce daughters or sons at will in the number that she wants. They have this complete control. And the reason why they have this control is that honeybees are partially parthenogenetic. So if a honeybee lays a haploid unfertilized egg, it will develop into a son. But she lays a diploid fertilized egg, it will develop into a female. So what honeybees do, queens do, is they mate with a large number of males, store and nurture the sperm in their body, and then decide whether the sperm should reach the egg or not before it's laid. So they can choose sons versus daughters. Yes. How do they feel? See, for a long time, it was thought sleep is a human character. Now we know that many animals sleep. And in fact, honeybees, amongst the insects, honeybees are probably best studied species for sleep. There are friends of mine, particularly a friend of mine called Barrett Klein, who spent his whole life studying sleep in honeybees. So, bees sleep, they basically take naps whenever they can by hanging on the nest. And actually, he has shown that by looking at the bee, you can tell whether it is sleeping or simply sitting. So they sleep. And he has also shown that bees need sleep. So he has developed a very interesting way of preventing the bees from sleeping. You know, when beekeepers sleep, they have these frames on which they have the bees, right? So he has made a magnetic stirrer which keeps shaking. And he puts this on that. So the thing is always shaking and the bees are not able to get asleep. And then he has shown that when such bees, deprived of sleep, go out and come back and perform a dance, they are hopeless at it. Their dance communication is screwed up completely because of lack of sleep. In fact, I wrote an article saying even honeybees need a good night's sleep. Now we know that many animals sleep, many insects sleep. So this has become a huge research. In fact, this friend of mine is at the moment writing a book on sleep in animals. It should be, I think, out later this year. Yes, please. Anybody? Whoever speaks first. Yes. So whoever speaks first. See, she understood. Yes.
Termites, you said the king is the one who's kind of,
Nobody is controlling. The control is always decentralized. The king exists, he's there, and he's continuously mating with the queen and providing sperm, unlike in others where they leave the nest, never come back.
but the king is the one still deciding whether it's a male or
Male, that decision, that's something which the male still can't do anything about. It's only the female. Because males donate sperm, but the female can decide to withhold that sperm.
I also find the image that was the diagram. Queen.
Yes. In termites, often one of the daughters is allowed to grow up and become a queen. So termites can have multiple queens simultaneously, unlike in the same colony. Yes. Many insects can have, but not honeybees. Yes. Feelings. Now, you tell me why you think this does not have feeling. What is your criteria? How do you know? It's not screaming because I've switched it off. So it's a very hard question. All I'm trying to say is a very hard question. How do you know? We know each other because they speak to us. We know animals because they scream. But how do you know an amoeba does not have feeling? How do you know a bacteria does not have? So it's a very difficult question to answer. I'm not saying we should not ask the question, but it's a very difficult question to answer. With higher animals, it becomes easier and easier. With lower animals, how do we know? They don't communicate. We don't understand their language. A bacteria may have a strong feeling of happiness and produce some chemicals. We don't know. It's very hard to tell. I'm not ruling it out. Very hard to tell. It'll be wonderful if somebody thinks of how to do this. Yes. How often? Fall sick. In principle, very often, because they live in extremely crowded conditions, I can see. Infection can spread very rapidly. Therefore, they have two kinds of being. We have immunity. All of us have an immune system. Social insects have two kinds of immunity. There is so-called individual immunity, which is somewhat like other species. They also have something called social immunity. As a group, They have a special kind of immunity. So they have enormous adaptations to avoid falling sick. And then to do what to do when you fall sick, how to take care of the sick, how to take care of the injured. There's a huge literature. Yes, they fall sick, but not as often as we might think they do. So there are various mechanisms to avoid this problem. Yes. They have more kings. Yes, each queen has a king. In many species, that's true. In fact, in honeybees, when the single queen goes out, she mates with 20 to 25 different males successively, collects sperm from all of them, nurtures them, and produces genetic variability. In many species, they do this, not just one king. I don't know that they don't do it. Many species do. They do have. Yes. Many species do. Some species, again, why some species do, others don't do, we don't know. But in many species, there is so-called multiple mating. Absolutely. What would constitute a hypothetical answer? We have to come up with some hypothetical answers and choose between them. No? So what's the hypothetical answer? We can't say God made them. Maybe true, but not useful for us. Can you think of a hypothetical answer? And then we can say, that's how you have to proceed. In science, what you do, you ask a question, and then you give a hypothetical answer. That's what we call a hypothesis. Then you try to disprove that hypothesis. Then you ask another hypothesis. Can you think of some... Sorry? Yeah. Let's take... Optimize for what?
Right.
No, but what do you mean optimized? Why? No, stabilize is different from what he's saying. What he's saying, if you put it in different words, is in fact a two-dimensional lattice of hexagons is the most optimal way of utilizing space. Now let's start. So if they are not hexagons, what would they be? Let's start with cylinders. If they are cylinders, what happens? Between cylinders, a lot of space is wasted. Okay? So now let's make them triangles. No space is wasted. But the triangles have acute angles and the larva is a cylinder. So larva would prefer a cylinder, not a triangle. Make them squares. Again, you have acute angles or even 90 right angles, which is not good for the larva. Now, hexagon, you can see, comes closer to a cylinder. But then why not pentagons? Why not heptagons? Try and draw. You cannot draw a lattice of pentagons on a two-dimensional space, or of pentagons, or of heptagons. You will leave some spaces in between, or some of them will become hexagons. Hexagons are the only thing that you can cover up the entire space without leaving anything, and yet comes close to a cylinder. So it is the most optimal way of utilizing space. Also, reduction in amount of wax produced. Now, for these questions, one can answer in many different ways. This is one kind of answer. You might say, but how do the bees know that they should do this? Bees don't know. It turns out that lots of bees are building their individual cells, and they're all trying to push wax on either side, and a lattice of hexagons automatically emerges. This is what we call emergent properties. No bee knows that I must make a hexagon. That's the most efficient way of using space. Nothing. All it knows is I should push wax and try to make my cell as big as possible. But every bee is doing the same thing. The result automatically is a hexagon. This is what we call an emergent property. There is no intelligence of the individual here. In fact, the very nice proof of this was produced by somebody in the 1950s. So a person was studying fish, and he was studying a species of fish which is very aggressive and very territorial. And he brought some of these fish and put them in a fish tank in the lab, put some sand underneath, and he put lots of fish there. They were very unhappy because each is highly territorial. So every fish tried to scoop off sand and saying, this is my territory, don't come anywhere near. Everybody did that. Then I took a picture from top. You have a beautiful pattern of hexagons. Occasionally a few pentagons, mostly hexagons. So if you are trying to optimize use of space, hexagons happen automatically. Many of the remarkable things that insect societies do is because of such emergent properties, which happens automatically. Nobody is planning these things. Okay? Shall we move on to some specific experiments with more specific questions? And then again, you can ask questions. So I want to take you through 2 or 3 examples. The first example I want to take you through is, I have one more thing before that. Insect societies resemble human societies in many ways and are arguably more efficient than ours in some ways. I expected there'll be some social science, humanities kind of people here, so I put in one more slide for you. They sustainably harvest environmental resources. They engineer the environment both inside and outside the nest. They practice agriculture. They fight disease with a combination of individual and communal and social immunity. They organize social hunting parties. They navigate their environment using territorial and celestial cues, and majorly influence the evolutionary trajectories of other organisms such as flowering plants. The evolution of flowering plants has been majorly influenced by bees especially. Okay, so now let me take one specific example, which technically we call ant colony optimization. A simple observation is that if this is the nest of an ant, this is a ground living ant, not like the Ecophylla in the tree. There's a nest here and there's food there. And it turns out that there are 2 ways to get the food. One is a short path and one is a long path for whatever reason. The observation is that ants are so smart, they will always use the short path and not the long path. How do they do this? Are they so intelligent? Do they know how to measure? Do they know that short is better? None of this is required. The choice of the short path over the long path emerges spontaneously, just like the hexagonal cells. And this was studied by a friend of mine called Jean-Louis Deneuberg from Belgium, from Brussels. He was a chemist. If he was a biologist, I'm sure he would have said, the ants walk up and down, measure this, measure that, and they know somehow this is better than that. He's a chemist, he doesn't know anything. He said, this must be a property of chemistry. And he decided to investigate this. He, by the way, was a student of Ilya Prigozhin. So you can see where he is coming from. So this is what it is. Yeah, yes. So this is the ant that he studied. And he decided to experiment with them in a laboratory. Very simple. He bought one plastic box and put the ant nest in it, bought another plastic box and put food in it, and he took 2 glass tubes and connected them. Except that he made one glass tube longer than the other. Now if there's a box here and a box here, how do you make one longer than the other? You bend it, right? And he bent it in an interesting way, and I want you to think about it. Okay, before that, he had a theory. He said, I have a theory of how they choose the shortest path, and I want to test my theory. And his theory is there's no intelligence, they don't know anything, they don't measure, they don't know, but we know that when ants walk, they lay a trail of chemicals. This we knew, and this he knew because of product chemistry. His theory is the following. The conclusion of his theory is complex behavior emerges from simple rules, as we discussed in the case of hexagonal cells. He says, 2 ants leave their nest at the same time and take different paths to food source, marking their trails with pheromones, completely randomly. Some take left, some take right, but they always mark. So this is step 1. Now, the ant that took the shorter path by chance will return first, and this trail will now be marked with twice as much pheromone as the path taken by the second ant, which is yet to return. Their nestmate, that is the next ant, will now be attracted to the shorter path because of its higher concentration of pheromone. Nothing more is needed. Right? The colony's efficient behavior, that is efficiency in choosing the short path, emerges from the collective activity of individuals following 2 very basic rules. The ants only know this. Lay pheromones, follow the trail of others. If I do this, automatically the colony will forage efficiently. No intelligence. This is what we call distributed intelligence or emergent behavior. This is just a theory. You have to test this theory. So to test this theory, he brought the ants to the lab and he connected them to glass tubes in this interesting way. So here is the nest and here is the foraging area. and he used glass tubes. So here there are two parts of the glass tube. This is the short path, this is the long path, and he reversed it here, short path, long path. Now actually there are many different ways they can take. So this is one, this is another one, this is one. So there are many ways they can take. They can take the longest one like this. And in the beginning, the ants were randomly distributed, and within 8 minutes, see what the ants did. They took the shortest possible path in both this loop as well as that. Okay, but this doesn't prove his theory. This is the observation. Now what he did was, his theory is that they choose randomly and pheromone. So I built a simple computer simulation model to predict how fast this short path should win over the long path. And he compared that. So this is what the rate at which the short should win. This is the computer simulation part, the solid line, and this is what the ants did. You can see they're very close to each other. And this is what the data would look like. So here is one experiment. You can see after some time the long path will win here, and you see here it wins completely. Depends on how long you wait. And you can see here after some time it wins completely. Only the short path. Nobody is using the long path or intermediate. But this is impressive, but it's not conclusive proof. When you do your experiment and come to a conclusion, especially if your results agree with your theory, you must be very dissatisfied. You say, I must do something to destroy my theory. And if I fail, then I am there. So he said, I have to do one more clinching experiment. How not satisfied with this? How do I make the ants not be able to take the shortest path? And his idea was very simple. He said, I will keep the short path closed for 30 minutes. The ants have no choice but to go up and down the long path, full of pheromone. Now I'll open the short path. Short path has no chance, because already there's so much pheromone. And that is the clinching experiment she did, and showed that it's always the short path which prevailed, the long path never came. Now this fact is impressive to different people in different ways. But for a man called Marco Dorigo, also in Belgium, this was impressive for a completely different reason. He says this mechanism is what we need for computer science, what we need in telecommunications. So he immediately jumped on this, and he researched for a few years and actually has written a book called Ant Colony Optimization. This is Marco Dorigo and somebody else. In fact, this book is so popular that there's an inexpensive Indian edition of this book. And this principle has been used in computer science in so many ways. Very briefly, I will summarize. Marco Dorigo and his colleagues have adapted ant-based routing to handle internet traffic. Simulation results indicate that their technique outperforms all existing routing methods, including the protocol currently used in the internet. Ant-based models are now being used by Southwest Airlines for the efficient routing of cargo. Simple curiosity, how does the ant know this is the short path? What do I have next? Okay, so this is another colleague of his, another ant researcher who was actually hired by the France Telecom company. Forget your ants, come and help us because we have lots of problem in our telecommunication. So he says the ultimate application of ant-based routing methods might be on the internet where traffic is painfully unpredictable. The most powerful insight from swarm intelligence, this is by the way called swarm intelligence, this sort of collective behavior, is that complex collective behavior can emerge from individuals following simple rules. Possible applications of swarm intelligence may be limited only by the imagination. One of the interesting things he did was, he simulated the problem that telephone companies have. So many TV channels have these phone-in games or phone-in competition. So suddenly everybody will phone when Amitabh Bachchan says, "Kaun banega crorepati," they'll all phone and that line gets clogged. What to do? Then he used this ant-based, he came up with an algorithm where you can switch to other telephone lines, and when the TV show is over, again you can come back to this line. So many people are using wisdom gained from ants and other creatures in many different applications, as I already indicated. Questions? Yes. Are we? Okay. See, it is very easy to believe that we are at the pinnacle of evolution. But there is no evidence. The way you should look at evolution is all species which are alive today are at one level. Their ancestry may be deep or shallow, but they are all evolved. So it's not that we are more evolved from ants. If ants have survived, in fact, ants evolved much before us, and they're still alive. Whereas we came only recently, and we may not be alive for much longer. So it is not as if we are much more evolved. What you're probably saying is why so-called higher animals, larger animals. But then that's a problem of body size versus this. It's not that more evolved. There was an interesting analogy a friend of mine said. He calculated the number of neurons in the human brain. And he calculated the number of neurons in the honeybee colony. Similar magnitude. Concentrated, distributed. Now what are the pros and cons? Concentrated, therefore, coordination is perfect. My right hand knows what my left hand is doing. But I can't gather information from very far without technology. Whereas in the case of honeybees and ants, coordination is very difficult, but they can gather information from wide. So very often there are multiple options for survival. This is one option, these are options. And both may be equal. Some take this, some take that. So there's what we call multi-stability. Entirely possible. So first point is that it's not that we are more evolved in any sense. Second is that there may be different ways. And also remember in evolution doesn't make anything new. It keeps on improving what is already there. So if our ancestor at the time of not just monkeys, but at the time of whatever early mammals has taken one route, it will be very difficult to go to the other route. So history is very important in evolution. Okay? Yes? Yes? We don't. We don't. No, we discount the possibility that we know. We don't know, that's all. It's an open question. We have to make the tools. So I was telling somebody at lunchtime that last week I read a paper in which people have tried to show that fish have self-awareness. Just recently a study has been done which suggests that even fish have self-awareness. Apparently when fish look in the mirror, they realize that it's me there. So, for example, this so-called looking in the mirror is the so-called mirror test is one thing that people are developing to understand self-awareness. So this was 40 years ago. It became a big hit when somebody showed that if I put a little something on the forehead of a chimpanzee and he looks in the mirror, he doesn't scratch the mirror, he scratches this. So he knows it's me. So this has become one classic test. It's called the mirror recognition test. Now they're trying it on. Some birds have passed the test. Last week, one fish has passed the test that I look in the mirror and I realize it's me, not somebody else. So who knows, tomorrow with bacteria we may find a way. But we have to find out. We don't know. As long as we don't know, we cannot dismiss the idea. Ignorance is much, much larger than our knowledge. Okay? Yes, please. At the back. Yes? Yes, that's what his last experiment demonstrated exactly the answer to your question. By keeping one closed for some time, now the ants, you can keep it open open the small one later on, keep it open for 1 year, they won't. So that's the bias now they have. So it is the same collective behavior which created a bias. And it can as well happen in nature. One path may have been closed because some tiger was sitting there, so they went this way. And when the tiger gets up, they will never use the short path. So the same collective behavior can exactly create this kind of bias. Absolutely correct. Yes.
The cycle structure and the environment joining the and African started to come up with new forms of
yes. Define they. Define they. You should have they.
termite.
Ants and termites. See, ant termites we don't know, but we are now getting increasing evidence that evolution can actually happen very rapidly. It's actually frightening how rapidly it can happen. The most spectacular example is during the 2-month COVID lockdown, people have shown changes in the beak length of birds. because they no longer had garbage to feed on, had to rely on seeds. So there was a measurable change in the size of beaks of birds during the 2-hour COVID lockdown, and it's already going back to the origin. That evolution can happen that rapidly. So just because we haven't measured, it doesn't mean it cannot happen. In fact, there's a very nice book showing urban rapid evolution, and it is a beautiful, unforgettable title. It's called Darwin Comes to Town. If you read this book, he'll give you numerous examples how things have happened so rapidly. So we should be sure that things are happening, but we have to find ways of measuring that. There's lots of evidence that evolution is happening, and urban environment is speeding up the rate of evolution enormously. And it's ironic, in some sense, urbanization, climate change are producing huge evidence for evolution. The direction we may not like, but stronger. In fact, many people who don't believe evolution will be convinced in 2 years you can make this happen. So there is very good chance that's happening, but you have to do careful experiments on a given species for a given environment change, a given parameter you have to measure. That takes time. But there's no doubt that it's happening. Yes. Depends on the insect, depends on how different the so-called natural is from the artificial. Consider my wasps. I have a lab in which I don't have walls. I just have a wire mesh. And routinely they come and nest inside my lab. Now, do you call that natural or artificial? On their own. So there is a continuum. So you can have situations where you actually take them and put them in. For example, if I remove a few bees from a beehive and put them in a plastic box, it will be extremely artificial. In fact, they will die within a few hours. But if a wasp comes and voluntarily builds a nest in the lab next to the one that I have transplanted from somewhere, I'm not sure how different the two are. So it's a continued debate. So you must know the species, you must know what its natural situation is, you must know what the artificiality is, and you must know how it will react. For certain things, it may not matter. For certain things, it may matter. So it's a continuum, it's a complex thing. You have to worry about it, you have to investigate it, and you have to interpret your results accordingly. If you know that this particular thing is affected by the lab, then you should be very cautious in interpreting. If you know this particular thing doesn't matter, this is what they do there anyway, then you can do more experiments. So it's something that you constantly have to engage with, not just insects, any animal, even humans. We have to constantly engage this question and do the best we can. You can't dismiss this question. We can't say, no, nothing will happen. Nor can we say, all transported lab is completely wrong. That also you cannot say. The reality is complex and one must engage with the reality. Yeah? Yes, please.
So, in terms of evolution, artificially created may be harmful to an animal. It's stuff about the data. Brought up that question, but it didn't answer.
Yes. So I very briefly, because I didn't, that's a separate talk or many talks by itself. Very briefly, the first idea that people had was that the individual bee may die, but the colony will benefit. And so the natural selection is acting on colonies. Whichever colonies are more altruistic stinging bees, that will do better. So this was generally called a group selection idea. And that had lots of problems, because how do you prevent one bee from cheating? Say, okay, this is good, but I will not sting. You sting. So this problem of these cheaters made this theory less likely, and there are lots of mathematical models show that it has problems. So the so-called group selection idea fell out of favor. Then the second idea came, saying that let us look at the world not from the animal's point of view, but from the gene's point of view. So a gene will benefit, because when I die, in order to help my brother, half my genes are also in my brother. So those genes are benefiting even if I die. So natural selection is not, I can get fitness, not just by producing offspring, but also by helping relatives who also carry the genes. In fact, I have 50% of my genes in my son and 50% in my brother. So this theory came to be known as kin selection. And this is till today the most favored theory. It has its problems, but it is the most popular theory, explains the maximum number of phenomena. Then the third theory came, because people found examples of altruism or cooperation amongst non-related individuals. Their kin selection won't work. If I help somebody on another continent, very unlikely that I'll be sharing genes with him. So there a third theory has developed, which is called reciprocal altruism. I help you today with the hope that you will help me tomorrow. So this kind of reciprocal altruism has also found some favor. There are some examples, and this has spawned other kinds of more complicated theories. So one theory from that says that I help you not because you will help me tomorrow, because all of these people will see that I'm helping you, so I'm a good guy. So when I'm in trouble, they should help me because I'm the helping kind. So this is called reputation. So this goes on. There are lots of these ideas which people are testing. The world is very complex. In some species it works, in some species it doesn't work. But people have a number of working hypotheses for how altruism can be favored by natural selection. The most common ones are group selection, kin selection, reciprocal altruism, and reputation. The reciprocal altruism reputation much more in the human world. They're using them much more. And reputation is considered a very important thing in the human world. Yes. Yes. No, queen is not gathering anything.
But
it's the workers who are gathering.
like they're gathering because the queen that
No. The queens has basically two kinds of messages. One is to say, I'm here. Don't look for me elsewhere. So that is one. The other is, you can't develop your ovaries as long as I'm alive. These are the two basic things that the queen does. Everything else is done by the workers. Or maybe the third one is, don't build a big cell. But apart from that, it is not top-down control from the queen. It is all decentralized. Yes.
why the
Low neural complexity is adequate. Not that you require. Is But how do you define neural complexity to start with? Very hard to say. Very hard to say. Very hard to measure objectively. And also, many of these things depends on the ecology. See, many animals live. If an animal is solitary and lives under the ground, it has no need for collective intelligence. That doesn't mean it is incapable of. So all of this becomes very complicated to be very sure of this. But there is no reason to believe that low neurologic complexity is necessary. It is sufficient. You don't need higher complexity. It is possible that many higher animals also do this. But because their individual intelligence is so clear and so spectacular, maybe we haven't even looked at it. Maybe, now people are studying human crowds. Why there are stampedes, why there are crowds, how do people behave in a panic situation. It looks like there's a lot of that happening also with humans, in spite of our greatest neurological complexity. In fact, these ideas are being now extensively used to understand human behavior in crowds. Human behavior in traffic. How do people behave in traffic? How to regulate traffic? All of that, these ideas are being used in the context of humans. So there is no need or bar of neurological complexity, but the need required is decide how these things are. Yes.
Then it sort of is taking effect into
Absolutely.
the acting doctrine of the Jordan Park thing, the dedicating by Dr. Premji. Seems like
Plenty of examples of memory, but not of this kind. A honeybee goes out and finds that there is a tree in bloom. Now when it comes back, of course it remembers this. It may even remember it tomorrow. No, it may even remember it next week. But of course, if the tree stops producing flowers, it will remember that I shouldn't go there. Okay? Now, these bees live for a few weeks. So what is long term? And moreover, the long term is based on, the environment. If a tree is blooming, in bloom for all my life, I will remember it. But if it doesn't, then I will forget it, and that is also part of memory. So memory plays a very important role in social insects. Nothing is passed to the next generation. Every ant has to do this. This is not passed on to the next generation. What is passed to the next generation is lay trail, follow the trail of others. That's all that goes. And that's enough. You don't need anything else. right? So every ant that comes out will see which is the better smell. If there is no smell, it will choose randomly. Very quickly, one will have more smell than the other. So nothing needs to be done. Absolutely. Very strong. Very well developed recognition within colonies, between colonies, in some cases with individual recognition, but almost all cases what we call nest mate recognition. You belong to my nest, you don't belong to me. And that's absolutely crucial for them because they don't want robbers to come in and take things. So honeybees, for example, a guard bee will sit at the entrance and strictly monitor every incoming forager bee and smell it, and it has to pass the smell test. Only if it passes smell test allowed inside, otherwise chased away. In fact, honeybee workers are always trying to enter into neighbor's hive and steal some honey rather than to go and collect small quantities from flowers. So their survival depends on their very efficient nest mate discrimination ability. Within the nest, it is less developed, more complex, and we still don't understand fully, but there would be definitely.
Different signal ants, where they are from nature.
No, mostly negative interactions. Lots of negative interactions, aggressive interactions, but there are more complicated negative interactions. Some ants, now when I use the language, they have done this, they have done that, don't think I'm saying consciously. In evolution, they have improved. Some ant queens have said, why should I spend all my energy to produce thousands of workers before I produce a new queen? Produce a few workers, let them go to the neighboring colony and steal workers, bring them here and make them work for me. And many ants have succeeded in doing this. These are called slave-making ants. But they don't want to bring adult ants from there, they bring the pupae. So they bring the pupae, they keep them here, and the pupae come out of the pupal case, they have no idea where they are, they start working. So these are slaves and these are slave makers. To the extent that in some species, the queen makes no workers at all. She goes to the other nest, brings some pupae and starts her nest. So these kinds of interactions happen. And again, there's lots of interesting things to study how these can. And you can find different relations, different evolutionary relations, all alive today. But you can imagine how this may have progressed. And people have even studied how they succeed in robbing. Why are they not repelled? Lots of interesting things. Yes. To take which decision? Oh, yes. I'm sure they take lots of decisions. Yeah, I don't know whether you would call it intelligence. The brains are definitely there. But what I'm saying is that individual intelligence is not adequate for them to say, I need an hexagonal cell. But it may be useful for other things. And it is indeed useful for other things. If I come back another time and give another talk about my own work, I will show you, convince you, that every wasp in the colony that I study has an Excel sheet in its head. And in the Excel sheet, it has information about my physical health, the health of my colony members, the health of the environment outside, and update this on a daily or hourly basis in order to make decisions. I will convince you. This is intelligence. But this intelligence is not enough to make hexagonal cells. So there are certain kinds of things which is done through collective intelligence. There are certain. And again, the species I work with are primitive, more like solitary. So they use more of individual intelligence than collective intelligence. The more advanced insect societies, you rely more on collective intelligence. But every ant, every bee has a brain and uses it for some purposes. But for other purposes, collective intelligence. Yes. Yes, I am not advertising on Microsoft. It would be some kind of database. Yes. Yeah. We have found people have found certain amount of variability within a colony, but that's much less than what you are imagining. In that sense, there is much less variability. Also remember that the mortality rates here are huge, and many of these may die before we even realize. In fact, in the larvae, a large fraction die before they ever become adults. So it could be that individuals who don't pass a certain threshold actually don't even survive. But on the other hand, having said that, people are finding interesting differences between bees, and they're calling them personalities. But this is not to be viewed in the sense of superior and inferior. It's different. I'll give you one very famous example. So honeybees collect nectar and from flowers. So in the US, they grow a plant called alfalfa. Alfalfa has these huge petals, and honeybees cannot forage from them, because when they go there, the petals snatch open and the bee gets a kick and remembers never to go to alfalfa again. Who goes to alfalfa? The bumblebees, which are fat and big. So bumblebees forage in alfalfa, honeybees don't. After the first kick, they remember never to go there again. So a person decided to do an experiment. He went to a very large field of alfalfa, nothing in the next radius of 10 kilometers. And I put a beehive in the middle. And what will the bees do now? And he found that the bees now discovered how to collect nectar from alfalfa. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is they came up with two different possibilities. Some bees went and said, let the bumblebee come. When the bumblebee came and opened it, then it went inside. But other bees said, I have a better idea. They went underneath the floor, chewed up a hole and went from underneath. Now this is personality. So we have barely scratched the surface. Maybe there's enormous variability, but it is not useful to think of them as superior or inferior, but as variable. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes. They even amputate the legs. They repair the legs. Okay. So the mortality is very high in the larval stages. But once a larva has been fed and made into an adult, you already invested so much in it. And then it gets more value. And under some situations, it gets even more value. So there are species of ants in which people have shown, actually they even do surgery, they do amputation, they won't heal, they do all of these things. Now, you might ask, do they do it because they feel? How to answer this question? The question is always valid, but if you can't answer a question, you must keep it in that box of unsolved puzzles. Don't stop asking a question, but you keep a separate box, and who knows, one day you might be able to figure out how to do that. Yeah. Then I won't go to another example because that will take too long. You can take more questions. Yes. So in humans, when we do that, we call it dialects, right? There are different languages, but also within the same language there are. Now, honeybees have only one language, but they have dialects, interestingly. So it was found, now, when honeybees go out, they have to also measure the distance which they have flown, so they have to communicate that. So it turns out that different bees in different parts of the world, same species, have a different slope for that. So if I plot here distance versus the way they dance, there are actually parallel lines. So actually we can claim that there are dialects in the honeybee dance language in different European races of bees. Now people have even begun to mix two dialects and see whether they can talk to each other and they can learn each other's dialect. Yes, so there are dialects, but we won't call them different languages, but that's a huge place to do more research. Yes. They wake up and start dancing to perfection. They don't learn at all. So it's completely inborn. They don't learn. Yes. Absolutely, extremely important. So honeybees will maintain 37 plus or minus 1 degree inside the hive when the external temperature fluctuates between minus 40 degrees and plus 40 degrees. Otherwise, they would not survive. The larvae are extremely sensitive to temperature, and they regulate, and they do it, of course, in two different ways. If they want to increase the temperature, they will drink nectar, and they will pump their abdomens and produce heat, and sit on the larva, on the pupa, and pump their abdomens and heat it up. If it's too hot, they will go out, bring water, fan their wings, and cool. By this combination of process, they are able to maintain plus or minus 1 degree. And without that, they wouldn't survive.
Even the next, yes, structures can.
Not, first of all, nest site selection, and then structure, all of this, but micro-regulation, when it becomes very hot, they solve it. Yes. Okay, so the problem is the following. Now, our observations are of the order of 100 or 200 years. We don't have any observations before that, and that's probably too short a time for natural. As I said, in urban anything can happen, but so we are. Second thing is fossils, but they don't tell you the lifespan. So as far as we know, lifespan doesn't. We cannot we cannot produce any evidence that lifespan has changed. That doesn't mean it hasn't changed. We're just not able to measure it. You mentioned lifespan. I must tell you something absolutely fascinating. A queen bee lives for 3 years and a worker bee lives for 6 weeks. They are produced from the same genome. If that's not impressive, a queen ant lives for 30 years and a worker ant lives for 6 weeks. Same genome. Not why, how? You can say why, of course, for the worker, why. For the queen, I wouldn't say why. So, social insects have become now the favorite model system for studying aging and senescence. Everybody wants to study this. How do they manage? The same genome, how does it become different? What is the metabolic difference? So, social insects have become huge. In that list, you can add aging and senescence to understand.
Let's talk down to the diet.
Give all the royal jelly you want to a worker, she will die within 6 weeks. So it has that very sensitive period. But royal jelly is given in that sensitive period. But after that, without royal jelly, they go into a completely different trajectory. And it is the qualities of that end point of that trajectory what we should be studying. This is just a trigger. Knowing that, we already know that this is a trigger, but that doesn't help us. We want to know how, at the end of that trajectory, caused by royal jelly at critical period, that adult, how can she live so long? That is what people are trying to find out. So yes, it all boils down, right? But that's just the beginning of the story. Yes, please. Yes? Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. So I told you the 4 kinds of ideas. The last 2 don't apply here, but colony survival and kin selection are the best explanations. Probably kin selection is the best explanation, because when a honeybee kills, she allows her sisters to survive. That is probably the best explanation for the honeybees. In this book, I have introduced this whole subject, and I say in the preface of the book that if the first man who picks up from the street picks up this book and reads and says, I don't understand, then I have failed. So try and find this book if you're interested. Then my own research is told in more detail in this book, but I didn't talk about this today, so we'll skip that. But this is a book which I would draw your attention to. The philosophy of this book is that you can do cutting edge research with no money, no laboratory, no facilities, just by using your brain. This book is freely available on the internet. Take a look at it. There are 15 chapters with 15 examples of cutting edge research which didn't require any money or laboratory. And the 16th chapter is a much more general discussion about low cost research. So this is something I want to draw your attention to. I also like to write for the general audience, and there is this series I write in the Wire Science called More Fun Than Fun. Of course, it's also freely available. I have written so far about 41 articles on various kinds of things, in the vein of this lecture, if you are interested, you can take a look at it. Okay? Thank you.
Easily holds the record as one of the talks where we had the maximum number of questions. And I think, as always, we can go on. So, how many of you would like to have Professor Gadagkar back if he's willing to come back?
Sure.
Thank you so much for this absolutely wonderful talk. We will end with a small token of thanks from us.
Remember which slide we stopped at. I can continue from there.
So, a plant and a calendar.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.